She didn't knock. She never knocked anymore. My daughter-in-law walked straight into the kitchen, poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot I'd just made, and sat down at the table like she owned the place. Which, I suppose, she had started to believe she did. "We need to talk about the garage," she said, not looking up from her phone. I was still standing at the counter in my robe. It was 7:15 in the morning. I hadn't even finished my first cup. "Good morning to you too, Melissa," I said. She looked up then, just long enough to give me that expression, the one that said I was being difficult again. Then back to her phone. "My name is Clifford. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the county, designed drainage systems for half the roads in this part of Ohio, raised 2 kids mostly on my own after my wife Ellen passed from ovarian cancer in 2009. I'm not a man who complains. I'm not a man who makes scenes. I learned a long time ago that the quietest people in the room are usually the ones paying the closest attention. I had been paying very close attention for about 2 years by then. My son Owen is 41. He's a decent man underneath it all. I have to keep reminding myself of that. But he married Melissa when he was 34, and somewhere in the years that followed, he became a different version of himself. Softer in the wrong places. Harder in the ones that used to be soft. They moved into my house 18 months after the wedding. Owen had gotten laid off from his project management job, and Melissa was between opportunities, which is what she called the stretches of time when she wasn't working. They needed somewhere to land. I had the space. Ellen's house, our house, had 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, and a 2-car garage on a quiet street in Westerville. I told them they could stay until Owen found something solid. That was 4 years ago. In those 4 years, Owen had found a new job. A good one, actually, operations manager at a logistics firm downtown. Melissa had launched and quietly abandoned 2 small businesses. They had money coming in. Real money. I saw the cars they drove. I saw the vacations they took. I saw the Apple Watch on Melissa's wrist and the new golf clubs in Owen's trunk. What I didn't see was any conversation about when they might move out. I had tried to bring it up twice. The first time, Owen said they were saving up for a down payment. The second time, Melissa cried actual tears and said she felt like I was pushing them out, and Owen looked at me like I'd said something cruel. I backed down both times. I told myself I was being a good father. I told myself Ellen would have wanted me to be patient. But Ellen would not have wanted this. I knew that. I just wasn't ready to act on it yet. The garage situation started in February. Melissa had decided she wanted to start a candle-making business, her 3rd attempt at something like this, and she needed workspace. The garage had been mine, my workbench, my tools, my old riding mower that I kept in perfect condition, and in the corner under a tarp, a 1974 Chevrolet Nova that I had been slowly restoring since I retired. Ellen and I had bought it at an estate sale the year before she got sick. Finishing it was the closest I had to a promise I'd kept her. Melissa wanted me to move the Nova into storage so she could set up her candle operation. "It's just sitting there," she said that morning, still on her phone. "You barely work on it anyway." "I work on it every weekend," I said. "Owen says you haven't touched it in a month." I set my coffee cup down. "Owen doesn't come into the garage." She finally put the phone on the table. "Clifford, we need that space. I've already ordered the equipment. The wax melter alone takes up Melissa." I said her name quietly, the way I used to speak to engineers on job sites when something had gone wrong, and I needed everyone to stop and think. "That car belonged to Ellen. It's not going into storage." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "You know, sometimes I think you hold on to things just to hold on to them. It's not healthy." I didn't respond. I picked up my coffee and walked to the back porch and sat there until I heard her leave for her morning run. I thought about Ellen. I thought about the afternoon we drove that Nova home from the estate sale, both of us laughing because the passenger window wouldn't close all the way and it was 40 degrees outside. I thought about how she'd wrapped a scarf around her head and put on sunglasses like she was a movie star, and how I'd laughed so hard I nearly missed the turn onto our street. I thought about how none of that was Melissa's business, and how I had let it become her business by letting her live in my house. That evening, Owen came home and found me at the kitchen table with a notepad. He asked what I was doing. I said I was making a list of things to take care of. He nodded and went to find Melissa. 2 weeks later, the conversation I had been dreading finally happened. I was in the garage on a Saturday afternoon working on the Nova's carburetor when they both came in. I heard them before I saw them. Melissa's voice first, then Owen's, slower, like he was being coached through something. "Dad," Owen said, "we need to have a real conversation." I put down my wrench and turned around. Melissa was standing with her arms crossed. Owen was standing slightly behind her, which told me everything I needed to know about how this had been rehearsed. "We've been thinking," she said, "and we feel like this arrangement isn't sustainable for any of us." I waited. "Owen and I want to make some improvements to the house. Update the kitchen, convert the basement into a proper suite, but we can't do that if everything is still." She gestured vaguely. "In flux." I looked at my son. "What does in flux mean, Owen?" He shifted his weight. "It means we'd like to talk about making this more official, like a long-term thing. We could pay you rent, a small amount, and in exchange for what?" I asked. Melissa stepped forward. "In exchange for some say in how the house is managed. Minor things. The garage, the backyard, the layout. We'd be contributing financially, so it makes sense that we'd have some input on." "You want to pay me rent," I said slowly, "and in exchange, you get to make decisions about my house." "It's just practical," she said. "We're talking about our home, too." There it was. That word. Home. As if it had always been theirs. "What figure were you thinking?" I asked. Owen named a number. "I won't say what it was here, but I will say that the market rate for a 4-bedroom house in Westerville at the time was between $2,200 and $2,600 a month." He named a number that was not anywhere close to that. "That's what you'd pay," I said. "And in return, you'd have say over renovations, the garage, the layout." "It's fair," Melissa said. "Given everything." I nodded. I didn't say much else. I told them I needed to think about it, and I went back to the carburetor, and they eventually left. That night, I sat in Ellen's chair in the living room, the wingback one by the window that nobody else ever sat in because they all knew not to, and I did something I hadn't done since her funeral. I cried. Not dramatically. Just sat there in the dark with tears running down my face, thinking about how I had let my own house become a place where I felt like a visitor. And then I stopped crying, and I started thinking. The next morning, I called my attorney. His name is Russell, and he'd handled Ellen's estate and my will and a property dispute with a neighbor back in 2016. I told him what was happening. I asked him some questions. He answered them, and then he asked me some questions in return. And by the end of the call, I had a rough outline of what I was going to do. It took me 4 months. I didn't rush. I didn't tip my hand. I showed up to dinners. I asked about Melissa's candle business. I watched the game with Owen on Sunday afternoons like nothing had changed. The first thing I did was make an appointment with a real estate agent, not a local one, someone from a firm in Columbus that Melissa wouldn't recognize. I had the house appraised quietly. It came in at $412,000. The second thing I did was open a separate bank account at a credit union across town, not the bank where Owen and I both happened to use the same branch. I began moving portions of my savings and pension distributions into it gradually, over several weeks. The third thing I did was update my will. Russell helped me with this. I had originally left everything to Owen because he was my son, and because I had assumed, in that vague way we assume things we don't want to think too carefully about, that he would be the kind of man who'd carry that responsibility with care. I changed it. I established a revocable living trust and retitled the house and my investment accounts into it. I named my sister's son, my nephew Garrett, who lives in Portland and has a level head and no history of expecting anything from me, as the primary beneficiary. I left Owen a specific dollar amount, enough to be meaningful, not enough to be relied upon. The fourth thing I did was call a moving company. Not to move everything, just the things that mattered. Ellen's china cabinet, the box of photographs from our first apartment, the quilt her mother made, my father's tools from the workbench, and the Nova. I rented a climate-controlled storage unit on the east side and moved those things on a Tuesday, while Owen was at work and Melissa was at a yoga class I had memorized the schedule of. When I got home that afternoon, the garage looked emptier than I had ever seen it. I stood in the doorway for a moment and thought, good. I gave Owen and Melissa 30 days written notice on a Thursday evening. I had Russell prepare the notice. It was formal. It cited the property address, the current occupancy arrangement, and the date by which the property needed to be vacated. I handed Owen an envelope at dinner and told him what it was. He looked at it and then at me. "Is this a joke?" "It's not a joke," I said. Melissa took the envelope from him. She read it. Her face went through several expressions in quick succession: disbelief, then anger, then something that looked almost like calculation. "You can't do this," she said. "I own the house," I said. "I can." "After everything we've contributed, Melissa," I said, and I kept my voice the way I used to keep it on job sites. "You have contributed 4 years of living here for free. You are welcome for that, but this is my home and I need you to find yours." Owen stood up from the table. "Dad, think about what you're doing. Where are we supposed to go?" "The same place everyone goes," I said. "You figure it out." He said some things after that. Some of them were painful to hear because painful things said by your children cut differently than painful things said by your children cut differently than painful things said by anyone else. He said I was being selfish. He said I had never supported their vision. He said I'd always made Melissa feel unwelcome. I thought about the candle equipment she ordered for my garage. I thought about the morning she drank my coffee and told me the car that connected me to his mother was not worth keeping. I didn't say any of that. I just waited until he was done. "I love you," I said when he finished. "That's why I'm doing this. You need to build your own life, Owen. I can't build it for you by pretending this is yours." He left the room. Melissa followed. I heard them upstairs, voices low and urgent for most of the evening. I went and sat in Ellen's chair. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happy, exactly. Not at peace, not yet, but steady. Solid, like the ground had come back under my feet. They were gone in 26 days. Owen barely spoke to me during that time. Melissa didn't speak to me at all. I helped carry a few boxes to the moving truck when Owen let me, and I didn't make it strange. The morning they left, Owen paused on the porch. "I don't know how to feel about you right now," he said. "You don't have to know," I said. "That's okay." He nodded once, got in the car. They drove away. I stood on the porch for a while in the quiet. Then I went inside and made a pot of coffee and drank it at my own kitchen table. Alone, in the silence of a house that felt like mine again for the first time in 4 years. 3 weeks later, I put the house on the market. I had already been thinking about it. The place was too big for one person, and there was a weight to it that had more to do with the way things had gotten than with any unhappiness I'd had there. I found a smaller place in a neighborhood in Delaware, Ohio. A college town about 30 minutes north, quieter, with a garage that had good light and enough space for the Nova. The house sold in 11 days. I netted $280,000 after costs. Russell helped me restructure the trust accordingly. Everything was documented, clean, intentional. I felt, for the first time in years, like a man in charge of his own life. Owen called me in the fall. His voice was different from the last time, less sharp. He told me he and Melissa had found a townhouse. He said it was smaller than they'd wanted, but that it was theirs, and his voice, when he said that word, theirs, had something in it I recognized. A little bit of pride. A little bit of discomfort at having arrived there so late. We talked for 40 minutes. It was the longest real conversation we'd had in years. He didn't mention the house. I didn't bring it up either. Before he hung up, he said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I think I knew what was happening. I just kept not stopping it." That was enough. More than enough. I met Beverly at a community concert in Delaware Park in early October. She was sitting 2 seats down from me watching a local jazz quartet, and she laughed at something the bassist did that nobody else seemed to notice. I leaned over and said, "You know your jazz." And she said, "My husband was a musician, 22 years. And I said, "Was." And she said, "Yeah, was." And we both understood what that meant without having to explain it. We got coffee after. She told me about her husband, a high school band director named Al, who died of a heart attack 3 winters ago at 64. I told her about Ellen. She asked about the Nova. When I described the afternoon we drove it home from the estate sale, Ellen in her scarf and sunglasses, the window that wouldn't close, Beverly laughed in exactly the right place. We've been seeing each other for 7 months now. It is not the same as what I had with Ellen. It doesn't need to be. Beverly has her own history, her own humor, her own way of being in a room that takes up no more space than she means it to. She likes to sit on the back porch in the evening with a glass of iced tea, and sometimes we don't talk for 20 minutes and neither of us minds. Last month she came with me to the storage unit and saw the Nova for the first time. I've been working on it most Saturdays. The body is solid, the interior is close, the engine needs one more round of work. Beverly walked around it slowly and then stood at the front and looked at it for a long time. "Ellen picked this one out?" she asked. "She did," I said. "She had good taste," Beverly said. I didn't say anything. I just stood there and felt something settle in my chest. Not quite grief, not quite gratitude. Something that lives between the two and doesn't have a clean name. The Nova isn't done yet. But I'm working on it. I sleep through the night now. Every night, and in the morning I make my coffee and drink it at my own table, in my own house, in the quiet that I earned. And I think about how much of your life you can quietly sign away simply by not wanting to cause a scene. I caused a scene. A quiet one, maybe. The only kind I know how to make. It was enough. I used to think that being a good father meant absorbing whatever came at you without flinching. That patience was the same thing as strength. That if you kept the door open long enough, people would eventually walk through it the right way. I was wrong about that, and it cost me 4 years to figure it out. What happened with Owen and Melissa wasn't a sudden thing. It never is. It was a slow accumulation. Every morning Melissa helped herself to my coffee without asking. Every conversation about the garage, every time Owen stood slightly behind her instead of next to me, none of it alone would have meant much. All of it together meant everything. The people who take the most from you rarely do it in one dramatic moment. They do it in small pieces, over time, counting on the fact that you love someone in the room too much to say stop. I think about the choices I made and the ones I didn't make soon enough. And I keep coming back to the same 3 things. The first is character. Not the kind you perform when people are watching, but the kind that holds when nobody is. Melissa's problem was never that she was unkind occasionally. Most people are under pressure. Her problem was that the unkindness had become her default, the thing she reached for when she wanted something. A person's character shows up most clearly in how they treat the people they believe have no power over them. She believed I had no power. She was wrong about that too. The second thing is judgment. The clear-eyed kind that doesn't get clouded by sentiment or guilt. I had the information I needed for years. I saw the cars, the vacations, the watch on her wrist. I heard the number Owen named when they proposed that arrangement. I knew what was happening. What I lacked, for too long, was the willingness to act on what I knew. Wisdom isn't just understanding a situation. It's having the honesty to stop pretending you don't. The third thing is the will to follow through. That's the hardest part. It's easy to decide something in a chair at midnight. It's something else entirely to call the attorney in the morning, open the account across town, rent the storage unit, carry Ellen's china cabinet out of the house on a Tuesday afternoon while your son is at work. Action requires you to accept that things will get uncomfortable before they get better. I accepted that. And they did get better. Owen called me in the fall. His voice was different. There was something in it, not quite humility, but close. The kind of tone a man gets when he's been through something that didn't kill him but did change him. I think losing the easy path forced him to find his own footing. And I think part of him, the part that's still the boy I raised, knows that. Beverly asks me sometimes if I regret any of it. I tell her no. And I mean it. Not because I don't love Owen, But because love and enabling are not the same thing, and I spent too long treating them like they were. I finished the Nova last month. Took it out on a Saturday morning, early, before the traffic. Drove the same route Ellen and I used to take out past the reservoir. The passenger window closes fine now. I had it fixed. I drove with the radio off, just the road and the engine, and I thought about how much of a life you can lose by being afraid to reclaim it. The ground is solid under my feet again. That's enough. That's everything.